It was the evening of November 12, 2006, when the quiet town of Cedar Falls was shaken forever. Emily Carter, a bright 15-year-old girl with long chestnut hair and an infectious smile, left her high school just like any other day. She waved goodbye to her friends, clutching her backpack tightly as the last of the autumn leaves swirled around her on the empty road. The walk from school to her home was less than a mile, a road she had taken hundreds of times before. But on that cold November evening, Emily never came back. The first sign that something was wrong came when her mother Laura noticed the porch light still shining at 7:00 p.m. Emily always arrived home before dark, and she never forgot to text her parents if she was running late. At 7:30, Richard, her father, began calling her cell phone, but every call went straight to voicemail. At first, they assumed she might have stopped at a friend's house, but by 9:00, panic had already taken root. Cedar Falls was a small, safe town. Children weren't supposed to vanish here. When police began searching, they discovered something chilling. At the edge of the woods, just 2 blocks from Emily's neighborhood, her backpack was found lying in the dirt. It wasn't torn or damaged, but the zipper was slightly open, as if it had been dropped in a rush. Inside were her schoolbooks, a half-eaten granola bar, and her cell phone with the battery missing. The area was scarred with flashlights, search dogs, and volunteers calling her name, but there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, no trail leading deeper into the woods. It was as if Emily had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation only deepened the mystery. Witnesses from her school said they saw Emily walking toward home, laughing with a friend, but after she crossed the small bridge near the creek, no one could confirm her whereabouts. A local shopkeeper swore he saw a dark van parked near the wooded area that same evening, its engine idling, but when questioned further, he admitted he couldn't be sure of the time. There were no surveillance cameras in that part of town, no traffic lights to catch a plate number, nothing that could lead to a suspect. Within days, Emily's face was plastered on posters across the county. Candlelight vigils were held, prayer circles formed, and the community came together in desperation. Yet, as weeks turned to months, not a single clue surfaced beyond that abandoned backpack. Police labeled it an active investigation, but with no evidence, no ransom note, and no trace of her, the case grew colder with each passing season. For the Carter family, the silence was unbearable, and Cedar Falls would never again feel like the safe little town it once was. The disappearance of Emily didn't just scar Cedar Falls, it shattered the Carter family from the inside out. Richard and Laura had once been the picture of a happy household, the kind of couple who hosted barbecues for the neighbors and never missed a school event. But after Emily vanished, their laughter was replaced with silence, and their once warm home became a shrine of grief. Every room echoed with her absence. The dinner table, once filled with chatter, now sat with 2 untouched plates as Richard and Laura often couldn't bring themselves to eat. Laura became consumed with the need to keep Emily's memory alive. She refused to change a single thing in her daughter's room. Emily's posters of her favorite bands still hung on the walls, her sneakers still rested by the door, and even the small notes she had written to herself, scribbled reminders for homework or doodles of hearts, remained taped to her desk. Every night, before bed, Laura would go into Emily's room, smooth out the blankets, and whisper, "Good night, sweetheart," as though her daughter was only away for a little while. Richard, on the other hand, handled his grief differently. He poured himself into work during the day, avoiding conversation, and spent his nights obsessing over the case. He collected every article, every police report, and every tip that came in. He pinned them on a board in the basement, stringing together theories that never quite added up. He grew frustrated with the authorities, accusing them of not doing enough. The marriage began to strain. Laura clung to hope, while Richard drowned in anger and obsession. As years passed, the Carters became isolated from the community around them. Friends who once visited regularly stopped coming, unsure of what to say anymore. Some neighbors whispered that the family should move on. But for Laura and Richard, moving on felt like betrayal. Every holiday was a painful reminder of the empty chair at the table. Birthdays were the hardest. Laura would still buy a cake, light a candle, and wait in silence for a daughter who never returned. By 2010, the house itself felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. The walls held too many reminders, too many echoes of laughter that had been stolen. Their once bright home was now dim, curtains drawn, and doors always locked. Yet, despite the suffocating grief, neither Richard nor Laura could bring themselves to leave. To them, the house was still Emily's home. And if, by some miracle, she ever came back, they wanted her to find everything exactly as she left it. 17 years passed, and the world moved on, but for Richard and Laura Carter, time stood still. Emily would have been 32 by now, but in their minds, she was forever frozen at 15. The case had long gone cold. Police stopped sending updates, and the missing posters once stapled to telephone poles had faded and disappeared. Yet, in the Carter household, the pain never left. Laura still left the porch light on every night, a silent beacon for a daughter she prayed might somehow find her way home. Richard's obsession never fully died either. His basement board remained intact, yellowed newspaper clippings and old photos staring back at him like ghosts that refused to let go. On a stormy night in March 2023, the couple sat quietly in their living room, the rain hammering against the windows. The house was unusually silent, save for the ticking of an old clock. Laura had fallen half asleep on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while Richard sat in his recliner staring at the muted television. Then, just past midnight, a sound broke the stillness. A knock, not loud, not frantic, just a slow, deliberate knock on their front door. Richard frowned, immediately alert. No one ever came by this late, especially not in weather like this. He glanced at Laura, who stirred at the sound, her eyes wide with sudden fear. For a brief, irrational moment, both of them thought the same thing. The same thought they had buried for years. Could it be her? Richard stood, his hands trembling slightly as he walked toward the door. The knocks had stopped, but a heavy unease settled over the house, as though the storm outside had followed someone to their doorstep. When Richard opened the door, his heart dropped. There was no one standing there. The rain poured down on the empty street, the wind carrying leaves across the slick pavement. He stepped out, looking both ways, but the road was deserted, no car, no figure retreating into the shadows, just silence. But then his eyes fell downward, to the doormat. Sitting there, soaked but intact, was an old black VHS tape inside a cracked plastic case. No envelope, no handwriting, no explanation. Richard picked it up slowly, staring at it with disbelief, his pulse quickening. Who in 2023 would deliver a VHS tape, and why to them, after all these years? He brought it inside, locking the door behind him, and Laura gasped when she saw it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, both frozen in shock. The storm raged outside, but inside, the storm had only just begun. Something had found its way back to their door, and whatever was on that tape was about to drag them into a nightmare far worse than the one they had endured 17 years ago. The Carters hadn't seen a VHS tape in over a decade, but Richard, always the one to hold onto old things, remembered a dusty VCR stored in their basement. He carried the tape down with shaky hands, Laura trailing close behind, her face pale. The basement smelled of dust and dampness, its shelves still lined with old family videos, birthday parties, vacations, Emily's childhood moments captured forever on film. But this tape was different. There was no label, no date, no sign of what it contained. Just a black, cracked case, as if it had been waiting for them. With a deep breath, Richard slid the tape into the VCR, the machine whining to life. The television flickered, filling the room with static before the screen steadied. At first, it showed nothing but a dark, blurry room. The image was grainy, filmed with a shaky hand. A single chair stood in the middle of the frame, lit only by the faint glow of what seemed to be a bare bulb hanging above. Laura gripped Richard's arm tightly, whispering, "What is this?" But before he could answer, a figure appeared. Seated in the chair was a girl. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, but there was no mistaking her features. It was Emily. She looked exactly as she had the day she disappeared, 15 years old, not a day older, as if time had never touched her. Her long hair hung loose over her shoulders, her eyes wide and hollow. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply stared into the camera, her lips moving slowly, whispering something that was hard to hear beneath the crackling of static. Richard lunged forward, turning up the volume, desperate to catch every word. The sound was warped, muffled, almost as though something, or someone, was deliberately distorting her voice. The phrase repeated again and again, her lips forming the same pattern. But the more they watched, the colder the room seemed to grow. It wasn't just her words, it was her eyes. They weren't blank, but focused. Focused directly into the lens, and by extension, into the Carters' living room. It felt as though Emily was staring at them, across time, across the screen, unblinking and aware. Just when Laura whispered that she couldn't take it anymore, movement appeared in the background of the tape. Behind Emily, in the shadows of the dimly lit room, something stirred. The outline of a figure, tall, impossibly thin, moved across the frame. Its limbs seemed wrong, too long, bending in ways no humans should. Emily's whispers grew faster, her lips trembling as her eyes darted briefly behind her, then back to the camera with a look of pure desperation. Before they could make sense of it, the tape cut to static. The screen went black, leaving only the hollow hum of the VCR, and the sound of Laura's sharp gasp echoing through the basement. Richard and Laura sat frozen in front of the static screen, their breathing shallow. The tape had ended, but its effect clung to the air like smoke. Richard immediately rewound it. The VCR whirred as the images replayed, and once again, Emily appeared on the screen. Her lips moved, repeating that same haunting phrase. Laura leaned closer, trying to read them, but the distortion made it maddeningly unclear. With each replay, however, they noticed something new. Something they had missed before. The shadows in the background weren't just moving randomly. They seemed to pulse, as though they were alive, creeping closer to Emily every time the camera flickered. The details of Emily's face were unsettling as well. It wasn't just that she hadn't aged. Her skin seemed unnaturally pale, almost drained of color, and her eyes had a glassy sheen that made her look both alive and not alive at the same time. Her lips trembled as she whispered, but her expression never changed. No fear, no sadness, no emotion, just a blank, desperate stare into the lens. Laura began to sob quietly, whispering, "That's not her, that can't be her." But Richard shook his head violently. It is Emily." His denial felt more like a plea than a certainty. On the 10th replay, the words finally began to make sense. At first, they thought she was calling for help, but as Laura studied the movements of her daughter's lips, she suddenly recognized the phrase. Emily was whispering the same 4 words again and again. "Don't let him in." The realization sent chills through her body. She clutched Richard's arm so tightly that her nails dug into his skin. Richard, however, leaned forward with an expression caught between horror and disbelief. If Emily was warning them, then who, or what, was she warning them about? But it wasn't just Emily's words that terrified them. As they paused and rewound the tape frame by frame, they noticed something else. The shadowy figure in the background wasn't merely lurking. It was standing behind Emily's chair the entire time, almost blending with the darkness. In one frame, its elongated fingers rested lightly on the back of her chair. In another, its head tilted unnaturally toward the camera, as though aware of being watched. Richard froze the tape on that frame, and both he and Laura stared at the vague outline of a face, or what should have been a face. It had no eyes, no mouth, just an empty, distorted void where features should have been. The longer they stared at the paused image, the more unsettling it became. The static on the screen seemed to grow louder, filling the basement with an unbearable hum. Then, without pressing play, the tape flickered on its own. Emily's whispering voice returned, louder this time, echoing through the room. "Don't let him in, don't let him in." Laura screamed and yanked the plug from the wall, plunging the basement into silence. But even in that silence, both of them swore they could still hear Emily's words, faintly lingering in the air. Like a warning they weren't meant to ignore. After Laura yanked the plug from the wall, the basement fell into an unnatural silence. The television screen was black, but both she and Richard sat frozen, their ears straining. It was as if the house itself had gone still, holding its breath. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Laura clutched her chest, trembling, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "That wasn't just a tape." Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing, replaying Emily's words over and over in his head. Don't let him in. The warning wasn't just for Emily's past, it was for them. For the rest of the night, the Carters moved through their home like strangers. Laura refused to be alone in any room, following Richard from the kitchen to the living room, to the hallway where the photos of Emily still hung. Every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally, every creak of the old wooden floors made them flinch. Richard tried to convince himself it was paranoia, but even he felt the air change. It was thicker somehow, heavier, as if the walls of their home were pressing inward. Neither of them dared to go back into the basement where the unplugged VCR still sat. Around 2:00 a.m., Laura thought she heard something. A faint scratching sound coming from the front door. She froze, gripping Richard's arm. At first, he dismissed it as branches scraping in the wind, but then it came again. Slow, deliberate, dragging scratches against the wood. Richard grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door, his heart hammering in his chest. When he shone the beam across the entryway, the noise stopped instantly. They stared at the door in silence, both too afraid to open it. The only thing that broke the quiet was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, it began. A knock, soft at first, like the one they'd heard the night the tape arrived. 3 slow knocks. Richard felt his throat tighten, his skin crawling with dread. Laura shook her head violently, whispering, Don't answer it." But the knocks came again, louder this time, reverberating through the house. The sound didn't feel normal. It didn't echo like a human hand against wood. It was heavier, almost vibrating, like something vast and unnatural was striking their door. The knocking grew more violent, more relentless. Each thud rattled the frame of the house, picture frames trembling on the walls, a vase toppling from a shelf and shattering on the floor. Laura was crying now, clutching her ears, screaming for it to stop. But Richard stood frozen in front of the door, staring at it, his hand hovering near the doorknob. His rational mind screamed not to open it, but something else, something deep, almost primal, pulled him closer. Behind him, Laura's voice cracked through the chaos, repeating their daughter's warning like a prayer. Don't let him in, don't let him in. By morning, Cedar Falls awoke to an unsettling quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the streets damp, and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. But on Maplewood Lane, the Carter house stood eerily still. The neighbors noticed the front door wide open, its frame splintered slightly as if it had been forced, not outward, but inward. Curtains fluttered from the windows, and the porch light still glowed, just as it had every night for 17 long years. Only this time, no one was there to turn it off. When the police arrived, they found no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken furniture. The house itself was untouched, except for the living room. The television was on, the static buzzing like a swarm of insects. In the VCR, the same black tape played on a loop. Over and over, Emily's pale face appeared on the screen, her lips whispering those same 4 words with haunting urgency. Don't let him in. The tape had rewound itself somehow, replaying endlessly, as if demanding to be watched. Upstairs, the officers found the Carters' bedroom empty, their bed untouched. Richard's shoes were still by the door. Laura's phone lay on the nightstand, its screen cracked but still functional. It was as though the couple had simply walked out of their home in the middle of the night. Yet the neighbors swore they hadn't seen anyone leave. No car pulling out of the driveway, no figures walking into the storm. They had simply vanished, just like Emily 17 years before. What unsettled the investigators most, however, was what they found in the basement. The unplugged VCR sat on the table, wires dangling, yet the tape still played upstairs as if the machine had never been disconnected. The corkboard Richard had built years ago, covered with photos, maps and news clippings of Emily, was torn apart, strings cut, papers scattered across the floor, and on the wall above it, written in what looked like charcoal or ash, were words smeared in jagged handwriting. He's inside now. Rumors spread quickly through Cedar Falls. Some said the Carters had been taken by the same presence that stole their daughter years ago. Others whispered that the family had been cursed, doomed to vanish one by one. But no official explanation was ever given. All the police could confirm was this: Richard and Laura Carter were gone, leaving behind only an endlessly looping tape, and a warning that no one could fully understand. The nightmare that began in 2006 had returned, and this time, it had claimed the rest of the family. Oh, this day, no one knows who left that tape, or what it truly showed. The Carters' house still stands in Cedar Falls, abandoned, the porch light broken yet flickering on stormy nights. Some claim the tape still lies inside, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to play it. And if you listen closely, locals swear you can still hear her voice whispering through the walls, the same warning Emily left behind. Don't let him in. But the real question is, what happens if someone does?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.